All right, so welcome to our build an API using NodeJS and Koa class. This class assumes that you have Node.js installed and VS Code or some equivalent installed. It also assumes that you have some knowledge of JavaScript already. So if you're a little weak on JavaScript, you may need to ask me a lot of questions, okay? Cool, so let's get started. I probably should have done this, or I probably should have waited to do this until now, but in VS Code, go ahead and open a new folder where we're going to start our project. I already have a folder. I already created it. You can always hit new folder up here. Is everyone on Windows? Everyone is on Windows, so yeah. And then once you've created the folder that you want, just open it and hit select folder down here. Okay, and then you should see on the left side here the name of the folder that you wrote in all caps. And let me know when your screen looks something like this. Oh, right. And while you're setting that up, today we will be covering setting up a Node.js project from scratch, including all the Git things. We will be setting up just a basic, just like a hello world sort of thing using Node.js. We'll go over some of the more common and basic built-in libraries for Node.js, stuff that you don't have to download stuff from the internet for. It's built into the language. We will cover installing modules, so stuff that does come from the internet that you want to use. We'll do a tiny bit of testing, like code testing, and then we will build the API server using Koa. Okay, basically just setting up an HTTP server, and then we'll set up routes and middlewares using Koa so that you can have some requests come in to some URL path like myserver / page / that kind of thing. Okay?
You will add the QR?
Yeah. I mean, we're using a lot of libraries. We're using a lot of stuff that writes code for us. And we may end up skipping over some things, but I usually do a write-up after class. So if there's anything you miss or something that you feel went too fast, I'll have a write-up that I'll post online that you can view later. And this is being recorded right now, and you can view it later too. Yeah. All right, so any questions before we dive in? Cool. Just a little thing, I do tend to wait after asking if people have questions, because sometimes people need a second to think, or they're like, oh, is this a stupid question? Should I ask it? So it's going to be a little awkward. Just deal with it. All right. So first thing we need to do is set up our project. So up here, click Terminal and New Terminal, or you can do Control-Shift Backtick if you want. And you should see a terminal come down here. If you're on Mac, it'll look a little bit different for those who are watching the recording later, but we're doing Windows for now. So if you have Node.js installed, or I assume that everyone has Git installed. This is not required, but it's just useful if you're going to continue working on this. So if you have Git installed already, go ahead and do Git Init, and that'll prepare the Git project for you. And beyond that, you don't need to worry about it for now. And now we get into the Node.js stuff. Node.js, if you're not already familiar, is basically just an interpreter to run JavaScript on a computer rather than in a browser. Because normally JavaScript runs in a browser, right? But if we want to run a server using JavaScript, it has to run on the computer directly, right, by the operating system. And that's what Node.js does, all right? Now, Node.js, there's a whole bunch of libraries, and that's a really critical part of the Node.js community, is there's a whole bunch of libraries that you could just use to do things for you, like the WebSocket things or HTTP servers or these kinds of things. So built into the Node interpreter is a tool called Npm. It's short for Node Package Manager. And you use it to install your dependencies, right? So, and you also use it to kind of set up your project and help you with build tools and all these kinds of nice things. So what we want to do is, to start our project, we want to do npm init. Init is short for initialize. So if you do that, it will start asking you questions. So it'll ask you, what do you want to call this package? It's basically the project name. It will default to the name of your folder. When you see these kinds of things on command line, and there's a value in either parentheses or square brackets, or not square brackets, just parentheses, that means that's the default value. So if you don't enter anything, it'll use that. So you can just hit enter. And then it'll ask you what version. 1.0.0 is fine, and just hit enter. And then you can type a description if you want. So I can do something like CodeSeoul NodeJS meetup, or whatever you want here. Or you can enter nothing. Anything is fine. And then hit enter. Entry point. This is basically when we want to run our project, what is the name of the file that starts it? Okay. Index.js is kind of the standard. And we're just going to stick with standard here. So just hit enter. Test command, we're going to add testing later, so just hit enter. Git repository, you haven't set one up yet, but later you can if you want to, so just hit enter. Keywords, this is not going to be searchable on the internet. This is just something for your practice. You're not distributing the library for other people to use, so we don't care about this. And author, go ahead and put your name. Again, this is not absolutely required, but it feels nice. It's like, oh, this is mine, I built this. And then ISC, so licenses, there's a whole bunch of different licenses for software out there. If you don't know about licensing, I do recommend taking some time to read about it. ISC is one of the newer licenses. It basically says that anyone can use the software for any purpose, and if it breaks something, it's not my fault, sort of thing. And that's the default when using NPM. But you're probably not going to be distributing this, so that doesn't matter. If you want to do something custom, do something like proprietary or something like that. But in this case, I'm distributing this, so I'm just going to say ISC. And then this is kind of confirming. Now, Node.js projects, they have a special file called package.json. Okay? Are you guys familiar with the JSON data format? Yes, yes, no? Okay. Basically, JSON is a simple data format where you have a curly squiggly bracket, basically this thing here, to start, and another one to end, and then it's just key, colon, value pairs, separated by commas. That's JSON. Strings are in quotes. Numbers don't need quotes, but there are no pure numbers here. And the curly bracket is an object with more keys and values. So you can have objects and objects and objects and objects. You can also do arrays with square brackets. So all of those questions are just building our package.json file for us. And this defines all of the metadata about our project. Okay? Basically, you need this. That's it. So if this looks good, this should match what you entered, except for tests, because we didn't specify any. So it does this nice little message for you. Is this okay? Or since it has yes there, you don't have to enter anything, you just hit enter and done. Now you'll see package.json here. All right. Does everyone see something like this? Great. Okay, so now, if you don't plan on putting this on Git, you don't need to do this next step. But if you do plan on doing this in Git, I recommend creating a new file. Okay, you can do that clicking this button right here. When you mouse over your project name, you'll see this plus and then a file icon. And call it .gitignore. Okay. If you're not familiar, .gitignore, when you're doing Git things, it tells Git which files to not care about. So if you say add everything, it'll add everything except what's listed in here. So it just makes your life easier. The reason we want to do this is because in Node.js, when you install dependencies, basically third-party libraries that you want to use in your project, it puts them in a folder named node_modules. And you don't want to commit, most of the time, you don't want to commit that to your GitHub repository because it's just going to make it huge and it's not necessary. So you can just put node modules in here, and then that'll make your life way easier if you're using this with Git. Okay? And if you're not super familiar with VS Code, you want to do Control-S to save. Okay. Now, again, if you're not familiar with VS Code, if you change the file, you'll see this little white dot up here. And that means you have a change, but you haven't saved it. So if you see the white dot, hit Control-S. When you hit Control-S, it goes away. All right? Cool. So we have our package.json, which basically tells Node what our project is, okay, and how to do stuff with it. So now let's do hello world. So create another new file, and our entry point, our main file here is called index.js. So let's call it that. All right, index.js. And now, a best practice when writing JavaScript things is at the top to write use strict. Basically, that tells NodeJS to be really strict when parsing your code. It protects you from stupid errors, so I recommend it.
What kind of stupid errors?
Things like, oh, you forgot to declare this variable, versus it just reading a random spot in memory or something like that. Hey, welcome. And then after that, you want to do console.log. Hello. Hello. Good time. Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you. I like it. And then, as usual, JavaScript thing, semicolon. Now, if you're coming from the web, this probably looks, if you're coming from doing JavaScript in the web, this probably looks very familiar. It's the same. That's intentional. Okay. So don't forget to hit save. All right. Is everyone up to this point now? Let me know when you're ready, and I'll catch you up really quick, okay? Once you have this, there's two ways to run it now, okay? The first way is to just in terminal do node index.js, and that will use Node.js to execute this file. If you do that, it prints hello world. Yeah, right here, node index.js. Good? Good? Sorry? How can you what? Make a comment. Ah, yes. Oh, thank you. That's important. So a single line comment is just 2 slashes. A multi-line comment is /*. Good? Cool. All right. And Hassan, were you able to get this to run? Cool. Now that's one way of doing it. Another way is in your package JSON, in scripts, you can add another line, and you can call it run or start or dev. I'm just going to call it start because VS Code seems to have a thing for that. Cool.
There's no difference between those titles, they're exactly...
It's a name that you want to use.
Oh, okay.
So it can be anything you want. Yeah, you could call it monkeys with wrenches if you want. It doesn't matter.
Right, my mind.
Right? And then you can just do node index.js. Right? Now, you might be thinking, why do I need to do this when I could just do this? Right? Because this is the same thing. Mostly because if you need to add things like environment variables, or if you need to add other commands or whatever, this can get really long. Like maybe you have some flag like run secure, hello, or secrets file, or whatever, right? And in that case, you don't want to type all that, and this saves you time. If you want to run it this way, what you do is you do npm run start. So what happens is npm, when you do npm run, it will look at these scripts, and it will look at these keys. And then if what you type after that matches one of these keys, it will run this. Okay, so if you do npm run start, ta-da, does the same thing. What is going on here? There we go.
Yeah, I have that too.
Good?
Is it supposed to list it first, the build API, and then so on, all that?
Say what now? Oh, this?
Yeah.
Yeah, this
Oh.
this is an npm thing. That's normal.
Okay.
That's okay.
I have an arrow,
You have an error. Uh-oh.
NPM,
Let me see.
logo.
What?
You type strat,
Sorry,
and then you type, yeah.
Now, if you want to use some other random string, that's okay, but it has to match. All right, are you ready? No? Okay. Let me know when you're ready and I can help you get caught up. You got him, Alex?
Yeah.
Cool. Ooh, fancy. Sorry?
I don't know if you drink latte, but coffee with milk.
Normally I don't drink coffee, so the milk helps. Thank you.
Really?
It's still okay. I like milk. It's all good. Thank you for thinking of it. That's actually not bad. Nice.
What are you doing with it? Yeah, I think with that thing.
It just absorbed water from the atmosphere. I'm kidding. Normally, like, pretty much anything that's not coffee.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. But thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the thought. All right, so everyone's got their, was everyone able to run it using NPM? Yes? Good?
Yep.
Cool. All right. So congratulations, you've run your first NodeJS program. All right, how are we doing on time? Good. All right, so let's dive in now. Couple of things that we want to do. One is you don't plan on publishing this as a package for other people to download and use, right? Like, this isn't a library. This is just your server. So what you probably want to do is somewhere in your package JSON, the location doesn't really matter as long as it's at this root level here. You want to do private true. And that will just kind of protect you from accidentally uploading your code to NPM. Yeah. It's just a nice little safety feature, basically. Oh wait, did I?
Can you repeat this again?
No problem. So, NPM has a whole bunch of commands. I'll repeat it in more detail. How's that? So if you do npm -- help, it'll tell you a whole bunch of, whoa, my scroll wheel is crazy. It'll tell you a whole bunch of the different commands that NPM can do. There's a lot. One of these commands is publish. And publish, if you go to something like the NPM website, right? If you do npm publish, what it will do is it will take your project and it will publish it to here for other people to download. And you probably don't want that. Not that it's not going to hurt you, but why would you upload your random code to npm? There's no, like, no, don't do that. So if you do private true in your package JSON, it will protect you from that. At least I'm pretty sure. That's what I read. I've never actually tested it. Let's try it. Yeah, it says this package has been marked as private. Please remove that to publish it. So it's just a way to protect yourself.
That's useful.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. All right, and what else do we want to cover? Okay, so we're good on that. Now, crap, do I have a good example? I was going to teach these in a different order. However, I just realized it makes more sense to teach them in this order. So, if you've done JavaScript before, chances are you've heard of callbacks, right? Who has not heard of callbacks? Raise your hand. Okay, kind of, maybe. Okay. Well, we're going to cover it briefly. because Node.js has a common pattern for doing callbacks that you'll want to get familiar with. They call it a node back, because it sounds weird to me, but that's what they call it. And it's not like an official term, but if you say it, most people will understand what you mean. And we're actually going to get a little bit ahead of things. We're going to import a package to demonstrate. So, first, yeah, I'm teaching these out of order. I'm sorry. Before we go over that, we have to teach about imports. Okay, so in languages like Python or Java, you just do import and then the name of the package, and then you can use it no problem, right? With JavaScript, it's a little bit different. The old style, don't type this because you're not going to need this version, but the old style was you define some variable, and you set the variable name, and then you do require, and then the name of the package, right? But that's kind of the older style. That's being less of a thing. This does still work. You can still use this, and this is the default. However, the more modern version is more in line with other languages. So you can do something like import timers from, what is it called? How do I, timer. Wow. What? I can't even type on my own keyboard. This is terrible. Did I type that right? Oh no, is it what? Oh. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm sorry, you don't need to do this. Because this one's imported by default. But, it's actually timers, but we don't need to use it. But just for example, we'll include it. So, not necessary, but just for demonstration. Now, if I run this, whoops, if I do my npm run, it's actually going to complain at me. It's going to tell me there's a problem. Because, oh, well, that's terrible. Cannot use import statement, because import is kind of a newer thing, right? It's not the standard yet, but things are going to be like this. So personally, I prefer to, if things are going to be some way in the future, I try to use them a little earlier to kind of get used to it. You could also do const timers equals require timers. But with the new style, if you want to use import, there's another change you have to make to your package JSON. You need to do type module. All right. Has everyone got that? Cool. Now if you run it, it just runs as normal. It does give you a warning because this module loader, basically this type module, is a newer feature. It is experimental. So it will warn you, but other than that, it should work fine. Okay? Are you trying to copy this down now? Don't bother copying all this by hand. Do Npm Init on your terminal. And it will generate, yeah, Npm, like Node Package Manager. And then Init, like initialization. And then it'll ask you a bunch of questions and create the file for you. Yeah. Once you got that done, let me know. What's up? You got an error? Let me see what you got.
Let me see your package JSON. Can you scroll up in this arrow? And now import statement. Did you save? Did it? Okay, try it again. Swear.
is however. It's not that.
It's supposed to be capital.
It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want.
Either of them.
I don't think so. Okay, that's weird. For now, just do the constant version.
Okay.
And you and I can troubleshoot it later. Okay. Okay. It could be a version thing. What's up? Oh, you're good. Okay. You want to add these 2 lines,
Okay.
and then you also want to add this line here. What?
But actually, it's asking me to put the package name.
Yeah, that's just the name of the project.
Oh.
So you can pretty much hit enter for everything.
Ah.
Yeah. Okay, so
What's the constant?
right here. You good? Now this is actually not required because it's built in. I just want to demonstrate the syntax, so you can leave this out if you want to. Well, I really got to fix my scroll wheel. So now let's do an example of our let's do an example of what's called a node back. What we can do is we can do timeout or timers dot set timeout, and now we can do some function which I'll define in a minute, and then we can do a delay of, let's do 2000. This is milliseconds. Okay. Now this is basically a callback function. Okay. Actually, you know what? Let's do this a little differently. Let's make a new function called delayed execute. Okay. And then here, we're going to provide it that delayed execute. And in this function, let's just say console.log printing delayed or something like that. Oh, actually, is this a bad example? Crap, this might be a bad example. Has everyone got this down? We're still working on it. Sorry? All right. Oh, jeez. I mean, well, we're not ready to run this yet.
Since the required OPS module is not supported.
Okay. So because we did this, it doesn't allow the whole style.
Okay.
So I'm not trying to. It's gonna chill for 2 seconds.
Timeout.
No. So I changed it from before. I apologize. So instead of doing an anonymous function, we're doing a named function. So your set timeout. Your set timeout function should look like line 17 here. Sorry, I changed it. Oh, thank you. No, that's fine. Oh, that's actually better. What was I doing? Oh yeah. When I initially wrote it, I used an anonymous function, but I changed it to a named function. It doesn't matter. Either's fine. I just did this because it's going to be easier to teach. So now what I can do is I can do console.log print now. All right. So does everyone's thing look like this? Good. This is actually not a node back. I apologize. This is just a regular callback, but You needed to be familiar with callbacks anyway, so. Okay. Good, good, cool. So now if you run this, what do you think is the order that our print statements are going to happen? What's the first one going to be? Yep. What's the second one going to be? Nope. Nope. Normally, that's what we'd expect, right? But this is Node.js, and Node.js is not normal. Or rather, it's got its own version of normal. What's going to happen is, and I'm sorry, that was a trap. Sorry, I laid that trap for you. Without this knowledge, that is the correct answer, but I was messing with you. So what happens is, set timeout is a special function that waits for this number of milliseconds. Okay, so in our case, 2,000 milliseconds, or 2 seconds. And after that amount of time, then it executes this function. Okay? So what's going to happen is, it schedules this function for 2 seconds later, and then it keeps going. So this is actually going to print first, or rather second, because this one's printing first. So this will print next. And then after 2 seconds, this function will be executed, and this will print. Does that make sense? We got 2 nods. We got 3 nods. So now if I save and run this, I already saved, so if I run this, it should run in that order. Hello world, print now, printing delayed. Does it run like that for everyone? You have some error? Let me take a look. You got it? Cool, thank you. Yes? Scrolling up. You need this, is that what you're looking for? Oh, sorry. Let's do, how about we do this? Is that better? All right, Amy, are you okay? All right, do you understand why that works that way?
Yeah.
Sorry? Okay, cool. All right, so that is an example of a callback and of asynchronous programming in Node.js. Okay, basically you can define a function, give it to some process, and then later it will execute that function whenever the time is correct. Okay, so that's an example of asynchronous programming. Let's actually skip Nodebacks, because Nodebacks is just a version of that. So if you understand this, you'll understand Nodebacks. Nodebacks, I might as well explain it. Nodebacks are a specific pattern for callbacks, whereas a Nodeback, let's just call it Nodeback, I don't know, where the first parameter is an error, and the second parameter is some data. And so you do something like if error, console.error, it broke. You don't have to type this. It's just for notes if you want it. And then return, or maybe throw. And let me actually bring this over here so that you guys, yeah, there we go. And then otherwise, do something with data, right? So this is an example of a Nodeback, right? It's the same as a callback function. It's just the pattern of first you have the error, then you have the data, and usually you start with your error handling, and then if the error does exist, you finish the function, otherwise do normal stuff. Okay? This is just a common pattern that you'll see in Node.js. All right? Any questions about that? Is everyone like, why the hell is he telling me this?
Why do they do this instead of just doing accepting it?
Because asynchronous programming. Because what happens is, So good question, Alex. So let's say that I do, I'm going to write this in a comment because I don't actually have code to run this. If you do like HTTP request.get some URL, right? So let's say google.com. That is too many W's. And then oops. Or let's just do Nodeback. Yeah, there we go. What'll happen is this HTTP request, you don't know how long this is going to take, right? So if you were to try to do something like HTTP request.get and you do it inside like a try catch, right? If you were to try to do something like this, right? This is at some point in execution time, right? But your request may come back at a later point in execution time, right? The request may take like 5 seconds or something, right? So this error handling may happen, right? You don't know when this error handling is going to happen because you don't know when this is going to finish. What happens is when you execute an asynchronous function like this, rather, assume HTTP request.get is an asynchronous function. You don't know how long that's going to take. And an asynchronous function, you execute it, but then you keep going, right? You continue execution even though that's running in the background. Now, what that finishes, it's going to when this function finishes, it's going to execute your callback. And when it executes that callback is when you want to do your error handling. Does that make sense? Because you don't know when this is going to finish. And your program, you don't want it to stop and wait. You want it to keep going. And then whenever this finishes, you do stuff with it according to the callback. So this is a little bit tricky if you've never done asynchronous programming, because in normal programming, we're used to things run in order. If there's a function, you go run the function executes, and then you come back and you continue, right? That's normal. In asynchronous programming, you can fire off a function, give it a callback function to run later, and then you just keep going, and you can do another one, and you can do another one, and you can keep going, and you can have all these different functions running in the background. And you don't know when anything's happening. But this makes for really fast execution. This is why NodeJS is good for web servers. Because what happens is, a request comes in, it then handles that request asynchronously, but that may take some time. So another request comes in, it handles that one asynchronously, and it just keeps going. Executing everything in parallel. That's making no sense, huh? Okay.
We go back real quick to the error handling. I mean, if HTTP request.get errors out on line 34, and 5 seconds later, produces an error, does it still get caught in 36?
No, it does not. Because what happens,
where to the environment?
That's the thing, it's not thrown. It gets passed as an input to your callback function.
So it's the get that's not throwing.
Correct.
So they're the ones that made you use the Nodeback.
Correct. Thank you, Alex. So a Nodeback is just a pattern of a callback function that other libraries expect you to use. Because when the GET request finishes, it's going to execute your function. Okay? And then it's going to give your function these parameters. If you don't use the parameters in this way, your thing's going to break, right? Because they expect you to take these as inputs. And this is kind of the pattern, where you have a callback function where the first parameter is an error, the second parameter is the data, and then they expect you to do your error handling or your processing as usual. but that happens inside the callback rather than in the normal execution flow.
You think of promise version for the get then?
These days, yes, but we haven't gotten the promises yet. Okay, so this is kind of the traditional style of doing things. This part I'm going to cover more in the notes later. We need to, if the async stuff isn't terribly clear yet, don't worry. We can talk about it more later, but for now we need to move forward, okay? Good? All right, so, where am I at? Where am I? Actually, you know what? We should probably spare some time to do that, actually. So Alex meant, so callbacks are one way of doing things, right? There's an alternative called promises. And promises, Alex actually mentioned it just briefly. Hello, mosquito. Promises are basically a fancier version of callbacks, but they allow you to do stuff like this. Okay? Where if you don't want this to run in the background, if you actually want to wait until this finishes, promises let you do that more easily. Okay? Or you can fire it off in the background to wait for it to execute later. You can do both. But I'm not going to cover that in great detail for now. That's a more general JavaScript thing. That's not specific to Node.js. So that's more of a JavaScript thing that you should study. But in the write-up, I'll add a brief bit about promises. Okay? So if you're like, what's this promise? I feel like I should know it. Yes, you probably should. I'll do a write-up later, but it's out of scope for now. Okay? Good? Cool. All right. Moving forward. We did that. Some of the, really quickly, I just want to review some of the different comment packages in Node.js, because Node.js has its own standard library, and you should probably be familiar with some of these. One of them is, and I am going to include this in the notes, which I'm also going to post online. So we just looked at timer, right? This allows you to scheduling functions at some future point in time. Either run this function 2 seconds later, like we did, or run some function every 2 seconds on a repeating interval, or something like that. So this is one useful thing if you ever need to write a scheduler. Okay. There's also file system functions. This is a huge library. You don't need to know all of this. Okay. The most important ones you need to know are read file. Okay, if you need to read a file from the disk. Okay, here we go. I could have just, oh, that's right, I planned on doing it, but I didn't write it that way in my notes. I apologize. This is actually an example of a node back. I should have used this one, I'm sorry, instead of timers. But the FS module is short for file system. It allows you to do file operations, reading files, writing files, getting information about files, like what the permissions are, what size they are, these kinds of things. So you give it a path. You can give it options if you want, things like what mode to read the file in, what mode to read the file in, and then a callback, which is basically a node back, where the first parameter is your error, the second parameter is your data, and then you do stuff. The reason this is asynchronous is because it takes time to read things from disk, right? Anything that happens outside of the Node.js environment is going to be asynchronous, because stuff outside of the program, you don't know how long it's going to take to run. Maybe the disk is busy and you have to wait a second to read the file. So that's why this is asynchronous. However, if you don't want to do asynchronous and you want your program to pause and wait for the file to be read, there's also a read file sync. Okay? That's usually easier, because usually if you need data from a file, you need to wait until you get the data. So normally you'll use read file sync. And this will behave more like what you would expect, where you give it the file path, it hits this line, it blocks, it waits till the file is read, and then you can do stuff with it. And you can use your normal try-catch sort of stuff with it. Sound good? Ish. Basically, if you want to read a file, you use this. I'm going to have a link in the notes. Okay. There's also a similar one for write file. It's basically this, what the hell? Yeah, there we go. Where you, basically you give a file path. You give a file path, you specify the data you want to write to the file, and then you have a callback. Just like read file, but opposite. Good? Going once, going twice. Cool. So those are 3 popular ones that you'll want to know. Another one is, if you're doing server things, you'll probably need to get the host name of your of the system that you're running on. So this is the OS package. Where is it? Yeah, OS package has this function. Basically, this is anything having to do with the operating system. So you can get information about the CPU, information about the memory, these kinds of things. Then there is NodeJS also has path module. Because on Windows, we use a backslash for separating our paths. On Linux and Mac, we use a / for separating our paths. You may not know which operating system your program is going to run on. So they provide this path module to help you manage those kinds of things. You don't know if the root is just a / like on Unix and Mac, or if it's C:\/ like on Windows. This handles that sort of stuff for you. Okay. The most common function you'll probably use in path is this join function, which you can feed it path segments, basically like folder paths, and then it will use a / or \, depending on whether you're on Windows or Mac, and it just figures it out for you, and you don't have to worry about it. Okay? Good on that one? Again, I'm not expecting you to memorize all this stuff, it's just you should know that these kinds of things exist, and that you should look for them in the standard library. There's also base name if you need to get the name of the current file. Okay, so if you do, here's the path to my full file, it'll get you just the name of it, it'll strip off the folder names. That's just a nice handy utility function. And then there's also process, which if you're doing something like a file server, this is really useful. You can get the current working directory if you need to move around in directories within your server. And there is, this one is super useful. I use this every single day, process.env. This gives you your environment variables. Okay? And process is a global, you don't have to import it. You can just do process.env without doing any sort of import or anything like that. All right? And right now we need to take a break. So let's do, let's wait for maybe, let's relax for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll continue. And okay, so back to Node.js stuff. All right, so those are some of the more common modules you use. One more, sorry. There's another one called buffer. And buffer is just working with binary data. So if you're ever working with WebRTC stuff, streaming audio, video, that kind of stuff, you'll want to know buffers. And Node.js actually has excellent support for buffers. It's really complicated, but they do a good job of making it as simple as it can be made. So yeah, that's a thing. Just remember they have it. And sorry, one more. And basically all the server and networking stuff in the net package, which allows you to create things like HTTP servers or TCP, UDP servers, these kinds of things. Okay. But we're actually going to bypass a whole bunch of this stuff. But I'll have all these modules in the notes for you to look at later. And that way, if you encounter something where you're like, crap, I have this buffer thing, what do I do with it? Oh, there's a buffer module, and then you can read on it. All right, good? Okay, so now let's do a quick, we're going to install a third-party module just to do a quick example of promises and of asynchronous programming and of installing a third-party module. So back in your terminal, if everyone go to your terminal and do npm, whoa, hello, what? Okay, npm install, and if you do a -- save, what will happen is when you add this -- save, it will update your package.json, and it will add this module as a dependency. So later, if you set up this project on a new computer, you can just say, hey, install all the modules for this project, and it'll read package.json and just install everything there for you. And then you're done, easy, you don't have to worry about anything. So do npm install -- save, and we're going to install a package called Axios. Okay? Axios is an HTTP client. So if you want to get data from google.com or whatever, you can do that. So let's do npm install -- save Axios. You'll see it'll take some time downloading stuff. Yep, and it shows up in your package.json under dependencies. It shows the name of the module and the version number. Okay? Now, if you're like, but Beej, how did you know about Axios? There is, as I mentioned before, there is npm, and if you search for something like HTTP client, you'll see Axios. And there you go. And you can see things like, if you go to this page, you can see things like, oh, how many times do people download it every week? This is a very popular package. And you can see also like the licensing, how big it is, how many problems it has, how many people are trying to add new features or bug fixes to it, these kinds of things.
Are those GitHub issues or actual issues?
These are GitHub. So if you go to GitHub, 202 issues, 62 pull requests, 202 issues, 62 pull requests. That's it. Okay, so we installed Axios. You see it showed up here. And now what we can do is we can import Axios. We can import Axios from Axios. Okay. Now the reason we do this right here, we could call this anything, right? This first part, we could call it anything. We just call it Axios for convenience. If it's clearer, you can call it something like HTTP client or whatever. But I'm just going to call it Axios. And then, back towards the bottom, we're going to do, just as an example, axios.get. And now this is a really cool website. There's a place called JSON placeholder. JSON placeholder. And this website is basically just a little, it's just an online API that you can use for testing. Okay, so this is another person's API server that we can just get test data from. Okay, so for example, they have this sample code right here. If you run it, oh look, we have data, this kind of thing. Okay, so we're going to do basically the same thing in our project. Okay, is everyone with me? All right, so we're going to do axios.get. Actually, you know what? Hold up. Let's unclose that window. I want to get. Actually, I think I'm just going to copy this right here. And I'm just going to paste it here. That is terrible to read. I'm going to close this package.json. And then, damn, that's right. I mentioned earlier we weren't going to do promises, but we're going to do promises. So promises, again, I mentioned that they're kind of nicer versions of callbacks. So what you can do is you can say, then, with the response object, go ahead and console.log response.data. Again, because we're going out to the internet, we don't know how long that's going to take. So there's a delayed response. We're doing asynchronous programming. Whenever it finishes, so this get call returns a promise object. Actually, I think it shows you. Yeah, so if you look at this little box above where my cursor is, towards the end, you see it says Axio promise, Axio response, any. Basically, it's returning a promise. A promise is, how do you explain a promise? You can think of it like, it's basically just a wrapper for a callback. So rather than having all these different callbacks with all these different inputs and outputs and all this kind of stuff, where you know how the node back expects you to have the first one as the error, the second one as the data, but maybe a different library has different parameters and all this sort of stuff where it's all confusing and messy. Promises make all of that unified. Where promise has, if you do .then you can define your callback, and if there's a problem, you can do .catch and then error. Oops. Something like this. And in this case, if the get operation went well, it will execute this function. This function. If there was an error, it will execute this function. That's it. Promises just allow you to do that more easily. So now if we run this, we still have that printing delayed, that's funny. You can see this data coming from the get request, okay? Any questions? Is anyone getting errors? Good. We're doing on time. We're a little bit behind, but I think we'll be okay. You okay? Cool. Do the little head dance sort of thing. Oh, hey, nice. You okay, Hassan? Is it running yet or still having issues? How about you, Hami? You okay? Okay. I'll wait a little bit more.
Do we have problems?
Yeah, go ahead and run it to make sure it works. Again, this is just another example. So, good? Sorry? Cool. And how about you, Hassan? Is yours okay, or do you have some trouble? Let me see what you got. What? Every time.
Here we go, what do we got? Axios is not defined. Okay, you didn't import Axios. Go to the top. Oh, lowercase a. Your case has to match. Yeah, so now go down, because that A needs to match this A. They need to be the same. So now they're the same, now try running. Don't forget to save. There's A. Yeah. Cool. That is correct, except response. That's fine. Why did it put down the whole thing? Why didn't it just make it? Oh wait, no, that's right. What? There's some placeholder about type of code.com/todos/to-dos, not to-dos.
Two is good, good.
Deals. Yeah. Save and try. Looking good?
Cool. All right. So, did I just destroy my headset? No, cool. Almost though. Let's not put gross floor stuff into my ears. Okay. Alright, so that's an example of importing a third-party library. And last thing we're going to do before setting up our API server is to do testing, because a good programmer writes tests for her code. Okay? Has everyone got me on that? Good programmers write tests. I have to tell my team this very often. So to do that, so we have this dependency Axios, right? And we're going to use that in our real server, theoretically. In the server we're going to write, we're not actually going to use it, but just, as practice. But for testing, right, you don't need your test stuff in your production, right? You just want to run your tests while you're developing things, right? So you don't want these big giant test libraries to go on your production server. It's not necessary. So NodeJS allows you to define dev dependencies, or third-party libraries that you only need while you're developing and testing, but not in production. And that way you can keep your production packages small, but you can still have all the tools you need for your development process. So we can install a testing system only for use in development, and that keeps things easier. All right. So to do that, we're going to use a testing library called Jest, like a jester. So we're going to do npm install, and instead of --save, we're going to do --save-dev. Okay, and this will save it only for development, and then it's called Jest. Okay. Good. Good. Now this is going to, actually we don't want to edit that while this is going, crap. Okay, so while this is running, let's create a new file, and we're going to call it index.test.js. All right? Good. Now, as always, don't forget use strict. And you'll notice here that the color is different of JS. VS Code recognizes that this is a test file, not a main project file. So that's good. That's what you want. Now, I'm going to teach you a tiny bit of Jest, because I really want you guys to write tests in your code, okay? It'll make you a better developer. And it'll also just keep you from having fewer bugs. So in Jest, we can use describe to group some tests together. Actually, where's my example? Because that would be better. Yeah, show me my example. Where's my example? I want to follow my example. Cool. So we can describe a category of tests. Tests. There we go. And then we can have some function. All right. So where? Yes, sorry. All right. So the first parameter is what we want to describe the group as text. Basically, a name for the group of tests. And then the second parameter is just an anonymous function callback. If you don't know what that means for this part, that's not important. You can just copy it. For describe, it's almost always going to look like this. You're just going to change this text. Okay? This is a Jest thing. You can read more about Jest later. And then we can do something like before each test, we can run some other function. And I'm just going to do runs before each test within this describe block. Describe block. I'm so happy people here at Fast are fast at typing. That makes me happy. All right. Now what happens is within this describe block, we can define a whole bunch of tests, right? And then before each one of those tests, this function will run each time. So if you need to prepare some data for your test, you can do it here. There's also an after each, there's a before all, there's an after all. You can read more about this in Jest. This is just probably the most useful one you'll need to know. And then for your actual test, you use the it function. Whoa, not instance of, what the hell? What are you doing? Stop that. If you get that autocomplete, you can hit escape and it'll go away. And we can say should run successfully as the name of our test. Test name. And then you provided some function. And in our case, we don't actually have any code to test right now. I just want to kind of demonstrate some stuff. So we can do expect 1 to be 1. You can provide, so if I have, or basically, let's do something a little different. Let's do something like const result of my test equals 1, and then we can say we expect the result of my test to be 1. A good test will read like English. So it should run successfully. I expect result of my test to be 1. It reads like an English sentence. Does that make sense? Cool. So this is an example test. If you've never written tests before, congratulations, you've written your first test. I hope you write thousands more.
Yeah.
And now you might be thinking, okay, cool, how do I run this? All right? If you go back to, not another one, really? Oh, that's not a mosquito, okay. If you go back to your package.json, you remember how we have this test script, and it prints that there's no tests and then exits with an error? Well, now we have Jest, and we wrote a test. So to run that test, you can just write Jest. Jest is the module that we installed earlier as our development dependency, which you can see down here. Okay. So now, Jest looks for any files that end in test.js, and it will run those files and run your tests. So now we can do npm run test. And there we go. Our Jest test is running. And you get a nice little test report at the end. So it's running this file for tests. Here's our describe block, right? If you remember your index.test.js, you had this describe. Then you had this as your it, the test you're going to run. It tells you how long the test took. Then we printed something, so it prints that. And then it says 1 test passed out of 1 test total. And then it tells you how long the whole system took. Pretty nice. I highly recommend this. You should use this.
Can you also index that?
Sure. Cool. All right, I think we're good. Sorry?
It just means it ran slowly. That's okay.
Might be because your computer's running a whole bunch of stuff, or who knows. But that's okay. As long as it says, at the bottom, 1 passed 1 total, you're good. Now, if you were actually testing your web server, that might be a problem. If you had like a proper development machine. I don't know what your machine is like, but if it's like a tiny computer with like, what is an i3 at like 1 point something gigahertz and like 4 gigs of RAM, might not be running too great. But a server will ideally have more than that. Well, actually no, a server may have less than that, but it'll be running less other stuff, because Windows is heavy. Yeah.
Let me check my.
Yeah, what you got? That looks. Oh, okay. So basically, in JSON, you can only have one key. You can't have duplicate keys. So you have test written once and then test written again. You're also missing a comma because you need a comma between each one. But also, we don't need this one. And the last one should not have a comma. There you go. This is going to be fun to edit later.
And npm from that.
You got it. Don't forget to save. So is everyone test running successfully? Good? Do you need help catching up? No? Are you okay? No?
I'm just enjoying
Okay. Well, the next part may be a good part to start from. Because the next part, you don't need any of the stuff we've already
But
done.
you're recording this part.
I am.
That's how I'm doing my
Okay. What happened? Oh, there we go. Ah, okay, so you had the autocomplete. So when you tried to type it auto-completed with instance of, because VS Code is annoying. So what you got to do is you start typing it. I cannot read a keyboard sideways. Oh, yeah, you see how it's trying to autocomplete with instance of? You can just hit escape to tell it to go away. So now if you save and run it. Okay, a bit tight on time, but I think we'll be okay. Cool. All right. So now, up to here, we've covered setting up our project with Npm Init. We've covered a whole bunch of the different built-in Node.js modules. We've covered asynchronous programming, and we've covered installing a third-party module and using it with a promise, and we've covered testing. So now, let's set up our server. Let me get my example. Oh, my example's a little different. Okay, we'll just make it work. So now we're going to close these two. We're going back to our index.js. All right. In our terminal, we need to install the Koa server software. Okay. So what you'll need to do is npm install --save Koa. All right. And that will install the Koa web server. So if you npm install --save Koa. Yeah, we'll install that afterwards. We don't need that. We'll install that later, and we're good. Cool. All right. So now, I'm actually going to comment out this this set timeout here because it's going to add unnecessary time. Fun tip on VS Code: if you click on a line and you hit Control/, it'll comment it for you. Just a nice little thing. Because I don't want to have to wait 2 seconds every time we run the server. So I'm going to comment that out. All right, so let's set up our web server. So we're going to import Koa from Koa. Lowercase capital, it doesn't matter. And then from Koa, we're going to create our app. All right. So far, so good. And then I'm going to go back down to the bottom. No, here you go. Good?
Yeah.
Everyone caught up on this? We have not run it yet, because it's not going to do anything yet.
How come app is highlighted in the same color as content?
That's an excellent question. Oh, it's a warning,
Oh, okay.
because it's declared but not used. But we're going to use it in a second. Is that another mosquito? Good? All right. Hemi, you good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so back to the bottom. And we're going to do, let's do app.views. Now, Koa Koa is a web server, right? So what it does is it starts running, and then on your laptop it's going to bind to some port. If you don't know what that means, you will need to learn it eventually, but don't worry about it for now. Okay. And then it's going to listen and wait. It's going to wait for incoming traffic. Okay. And that's just the web server part of it. That's the default Node HTTP server does that for you, right? Koa just wraps that for you because there's a whole bunch of junk in setting up an HTTP server, but it's the same every time you do it, and it's like 50 lines of code. So screw that. Koa just gives it to you in one line. So that makes it easier. So that's the HTTP server part. The second part, have you guys heard of Express? You've heard of Express, have you?
Just for it.
No? Okay. So Express is a really popular Node.js web server, similar to Koa. The difference is that Koa is new and it works differently. Koa uses something called middlewares. You could think of middlewares like a pipeline, right? So what happens is a request comes in, and Koa receives that request, and then you can register middlewares or parts of the pipe with Koa. And then your request will pass through each part of the pipe. That pipe will do something, and then pass it to the next part, which will do something, and then pass it to the next part. And it'll keep going through the pipeline until it finishes, and then it'll send the response back to the client. Okay? So these different parts of the pipe, this pipeline, we call them middlewares. Okay? Because they're the middle. You have the input, you have the middlewares, and then you have the output. So they happen in the middleware. All right? So we're going to define, with Koa, to define a middleware is just a function. Okay? And to define a middleware in Koa, you use the keyword, you use the function use. Okay? So we're going to do a new function. We're going to use async await. This is promise stuff. If you don't know it yet, you will need to read about it later, but for now you can just copy. And in Koa, we have the concept of a context. Okay? CTX for short. Okay? The context is basically the request. Okay? It includes stuff like the web address that they requested from, the HTTP method that they used, any HTTP headers they used, like their login or that kind of stuff. It's all included within this context object. Okay? And then if we want to send data back to the client, on the context object, there's a property called body. Okay? And whatever we set the body to is what's going to be returned to the client. Okay? So if we write ctx.body equals hello world, that defines a middleware where the request comes in. It gets passed to this middleware. This middleware takes that request and sets the body of it to hello world and then sends it back to the client. Okay, that's how this is working. It's a pipeline. Now, at the end, now that we have our middleware defined, we can tell our server, go ahead and run on port 3000. Okay? Remember how I said earlier that a Node.js HTTP server is like 50 lines of code to set up or some nonsense? But Koa just wraps it all up in one line of code? This is that one line of code. Okay, this does a whole bunch of stuff. It says, hey, run an HTTP server and run it on this port. Okay?
What's used for this port? 2000 or TCP?
It's just a TCP port. Yeah. HTTP is, by definition, HTTP. And then it's whatever port you want to use. By default, HTTP runs on port 80. Yeah. But usually in development, we use a non-80 port because, or we use a port higher than 1000 because normally ports below 1000 require root access or admin privileges. And in development, we don't want to be messing with all that stuff, so we just pick a high port number. That's why you'll see in Java, usually in Java, they pick port 8000 because it's like 80, but it's above 1,000. Node.js, we just use 3,000 because why not? It can be anything over 1,000, basically. But we use 3,000 just out of tradition. So once you have this, you can do npm run start. So now, all of our previous stuff ran, right? But now notice how it hasn't finished running the server. The server is still running, right? Or rather, our program is still running. That's because now our program is running as an HTTP server. And if we go to a browser and we type localhost :3000 in our browser, right? Localhost being your computer, 3000 being the port. It's cool, right? Oh, maybe I'm a nerd. Okay. So congratulations. If you have not run a server before, you've run your first server! Woo!
And you can put HTML in the string, right?
You could. You could, if you wanted to get super fancy,
Put an H1 in it.
yeah, we can do something like H1. And then I have to kill the server, yes, and then run it again, because Windows. Or not really because Windows, but... Yeah. Cool, so, that's cool, but that's more like a web server than like an API server, right? And also, we only have this one web page. If we do something like 3000/user/1/posts, right, something like that, we're going to get the same thing. Because our server doesn't know anything about pathing or any of that, right? It's just a server. It's like, I got a request, hello world! I got a request, hello world! It doesn't care about anything else. But we can fix that. All right, so does everyone understand what we have so far? Good, good, good-ish. Ask questions later, okay? Good? How can you what? Oh, right, I'm sorry. Down here, Control-C. Yeah, if you're not familiar with the command line, Control-C is your best friend. It means, please stop whatever's happening. And, it basically means to stop the server. The reason we use the word... So a very specific definition is that we send some kind of termination signal to the process that the server is running on. And then basically our code receives that signal and reacts to it, usually by ending itself. So Koa, or rather really the Node HTTP server, when you do a Control-C, it sends a SIG-int signal, which is a signal interrupt. Koa listens, or sorry, not Koa, the Node HTTP server listens for that signal. When it receives that signal, it stops the server and ends the connection. Does that answer your question? Cool. That's a very detailed answer. Yeah. All right, so everyone good so far? Cool. All right, now, this is not useful though, right? This is not helping at all. This is just a hello world thing. So let's get real. So I'm going to comment this out. Again, little VS Code thing. If you highlight a few lines and you hit Control/, it'll comment it out for you. Let me go to my example project. Now with Koa, it's only middlewares, right? It's really simple. Normally, when we're running an API server, we have what are called routes, right? So if I do something like /user, that should route the request down one path of logic, right? If I do something like /posts, I can't say that word, it should route to a different set of logic. If we say something like /images, it should route to a different path of logic, right? We call these routes. And in Koa, we need to define our routes. Now, to do that, we actually need a middleware to do that because Koa only does middlewares, right? Now, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of routers that we can use with Koa. We are going to use something called the joy router. Joy basically validates your inputs. So you say, I expect this kind of input. And if you don't get that kind of input, it throws an error and tells the user, hey, you didn't give me the correct input. Give me correct input. And it handles all that stuff for you, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to install 2 more dependencies. One of these is npm install save koa-body parser. Okay, this parses JSON for us. Okay.
I have some error.
Uh-oh.
I can't write on my terminal. When I
No, that looks
kill
normal.
it, when I kill it with a terminal, I kill it from that.
So you do Control-C, terminate batch job, Y for yes. Yeah, looks good. Yeah. Control-C, and then because it's Windows, it'll ask you, do you really want to stop it? It's like, yeah, dude, I hit Control-C, so hit Y and enter. Yep. So you want to install a Koa body parser, and another one is koa-joy-router. I apologize that it's a little difficult to see here. Okay, is everyone good with that? Now it's going to take a few moments. We're doing on time. We're going to go a bit over, guys. I apologize. So, good. So now we got Koa Joy Router and Koa Body Parser. Was everyone able to install those successfully? Good. Good. Not sure. What's up? What you got? Sorry, I went to the next line there. Koa Joy Router. And then just hit enter and you should be good. Okay?
Yeah.
Ooh. Nice. Okay, now, usually you're going to have a lot of routes, right? If you're building an API server, you're usually going to be serving a lot of data, right? So we don't want to just have everything in one file. That's just a mess. So to keep things organized, I recommend creating a new folder that we're going to call routes. Okay? And then in this folder, we're going to create a file index.js. All right? Why do I export both of them? Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Huh. All right. Crap, I want to change that. All right. As always, you want to do use strict. Is everyone with me so far? And what we're going to do is we're going to import our Joy router from Koa Joy router. And then we want to grab Joy and then set up our router. Can we just do that? No, because we're going to use that. Okay. Yeah, that's a good start. All right, has everyone got this so far? Okay, so what this does, this imports our module. This get the joy part from the module, and then we get our router. Okay, our router defines our different API paths. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next using the router. We can do router.route, and then this route function expects us to give an object that defines the specification for the route. Basically, when we get data coming into some route, what do? We define that here. Okay? So first, you're going to need your HTTP method. Okay? If you're not super familiar with HTTP, the methods are just different types of requests. You have get, post, put, delete, head, options, the two most common ones are get and post. In this case, we're going to do get, because that's what the browser normally uses. And the path is, remember earlier we did like users, one, posts, that kind of thing? You can do that, but in our case for now, just do slash. Slash is just the root path, like if you just do localhost, that's it, okay? Yeah, let's go ahead and do it this way. Then usually, if you're doing an API server, at least if you're doing a modern API server, chances are you want to use JSON, just like this. So you want to specify the type as a JSON, JSON, okay? You could also do XML stuff, I think. I haven't actually tried it because we should not be using XML anymore. It's 2020. And then following that, you can define the inputs, but in our case, we only have the output. So we expect the output 200 in HTTP means okay. 200 means it went well. Okay. You can define different outputs for different status codes. For example, you've seen a 404, right? So you can define a 404 output too. But in our case, we're just going to define a 200 output. And the body of that output is just going to be some message. Okay. So remember earlier in our hello world example. So in our hello world example, we did our ctx.body, right? This is defining what the body should look like. Okay. So in our case, we're going to have, instead of just outputting hello world this time, we're going to output some JSON with a message saying hello world, just as an example. So what we can do is we can say, as our output, we're going to have a message. The content of that message is going to be a string. Okay? We could also say it's a number, or it's an object, or it's an array, or whatever. Okay? And this is helpful for validating that our code is doing what we expect it to do. Okay? And if we're writing documentation, this helps. Because you can just look at this and be like, oh, this endpoint outputs this. And it makes life easier. You could give this to your front-end engineers, and they can go, oh, okay, cool. I need to do a get at the root, and I'm going to get this output. I can write code against that. Front-end engineers like this. It makes their life much, much easier. And if you're doing server development, chances are you're working with a front-end engineer. So being helpful to them makes your job better. Because then they're not going to bother you as much, because they bother you all the time already. All right? So now, we defined all this stuff about our routes, but we haven't defined what's going to happen when the user accesses this point. Right? We haven't said what's going to happen when they go to this endpoint. In that case, we have something called a handler. Whoa, hello, caps lock. We have something called a handler. Okay? And the handler is when a request comes in for this route, how do we handle it? What do we do with it? Okay? We're going to define a new controller called hello world. Abort controller? What the hell is that? Just controller. If you get this autocomplete, just hit escape. Okay? And we're going to define this controller in a second. Okay? It's going to give you an error saying like, oh, I don't know what this controller thing is, but we're going to define it in a minute, okay? And then, last but not least, don't forget to module.exports. Oh, crap. Yeah, I didn't teach you guys this. Okay, got it. So I taught this in the JavaScript class, which we held a couple weeks ago, but not this Node.js class. When you have multiple files with multiple modules, everything by default is private, right? So if you want a different file to access data in this file, you have to export it, and this is one way to export it. What we're saying is, if another file tries to import this file, the data that you should give it is this router object. Okay? So now we need to do two more things. One, we need to create this controller because this does not exist right now. And then two, we need to tell the server about the router. Okay? So let's create a new folder in the root. Wow. Oh no, I don't want to make it there. How do I make it at the root? Okay, new folder called controllers. Okay. And let's do another file called index.js. And as usual, don't forget your use strict. Everyone good? How many you got, Alex? Just the one? Good, Andre?
Good.
Hassan?
Yeah.
Amy? Alright. So now we can do exports.helloworld, and we can define this. This is going to be our handler function. Okay? And in this case, just like before, we're going to do ctx.body. Remember how we defined it earlier? We said message was some string. It's going to be like this. Oops, that's not right. There we go. All right, has everyone got that? Good? Cool. So now, back in I'm actually going to move this to the right screen just so we can see it as a reference. If we go back to, not our package, if we go to our routes, we need to get this controller into this file. So what we're going to do is we are going to import controller from, we need to go up one folder. So we're going to do ... because we're in the routes folder, we need to go back to the root. And then we're going to do /controllers. Okay? Now, because the name of this file is index.js, just by giving the folder name, it's going to grab that file. Okay? Everyone good on that? Good, good, good. Cool. So now if we go back and look at our route, we have controller.helloworld. And if you highlight it, you'll see that it recognizes this hello world object, or hello world function. All right? Everyone good? So now we've made our route. We've made our handler or controller. And now we just need to tell the server about our new route. So let's go to our main index.js. And where is my example? Okay. So previously we had our use and then our random little hello world middleware, right? But now we need to we need to import some stuff first, okay? So we're going to import our routes from routes. Oh, sorry, /routes because it's local. Okay. And then we need another thing called, remember earlier we installed Koa body parser? We need that in order to process JSON stuff. So we can do import body parser from Koa body parser. I'm going to close this for now because we're not using it. All right, so has everyone got these two lines added? Good. Andre, Hassan? Yep. Lines 12 and 13. Oh, that's cool. That's not what I intended to do. How do I get multiple cursors in this? Good? Cool. And lastly, what we can do down here is we can say app.use, and we need to give it our body parser, okay, so that it can understand JSON, like I said earlier. And then we can say app.use our routes, and then the routes object has a special function built into it called middle. What? Did I do this right? I think I did. We're going to find out. Called middleware. And that basically, because Koa is using middleware, right, we need to get the middleware object, because previously we just have a route object. So by calling this, the router library will convert itself to a middleware that Koa can use. Okay? Everyone good? So now if we do this, make sure to save, and if we npm run start our server again, oh crap, I got a bug. So first off, because I apologize. I forgot that we were using ES6 stuff, so I did not write this like ES6. This Koa code that I wrote was back when I was using the old style, and I didn't update it for the new style because it was like, oh, how different could it be? Huh, this is why you test things. In our route, actually, let's start with the controller because that's the bottommost level. So previously, I had something like this, right? Or rather, this. This is the old style. This no longer works when you're using ES6 imports. Instead, it should look like this. In ES6 imports, you can specify a default, and then when you import the module, instead of being a module object that then you pull things out from, it's just whatever you exported as default. Okay? So by writing this, export default, when we import this controller, it just gives us the function directly. Nice. It just gives us this function directly, okay? And then we don't need any other stuff, all right? So then, once you've changed this to look like this in your controller script module, up top of your router module, you want to, first off, change it to be, is this actually necessary? Let me check this, because maybe, I feel like you shouldn't need that. Nope, you do. Okay, that's weird. Oh wait, no, what? Yeah, okay, you do need that. I hate that so much. Okay. Directory is not supported. Okay. First off, you need to change it. Instead of just /controllers, you need to add this /index.js. Also, instead of, I named it Hello World controller. You can just call it controller. You can call it whatever you want. The name doesn't matter. basically what it's going to do is it's going to take this function and it's going to give it whatever name you specify here. Okay? So everyone got that change made? Good. Then, back in our router handler, you need to give it that function that we imported. Okay? Good. So this should match the name of whatever the import was that you made. And then lastly, again, because we're using ES6, we need to tell it, hey, export this router function as the default object. So then whenever we import it, we're going to get this router variable. Okay? Or in our case, constant, but whatever. Got that change made? Damn, dude. Nice. All right, so everyone good to that point? All right, now back to our main index.js. We need to import that router from our, again, we need to do /index.js here. Okay? Good? Back in our main index.js. Change it to routes/index.js. And I honestly don't remember how I had it written before, but import router. Okay. Again, this can be any name because it's just exporting that variable. And then whatever name you want that variable to be is what you set here. And then, everyone good on that part? And then at the bottom, this actually doesn't change. This was correct. Router.middleware. All right, good.
Might have been routers.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This should be okay though. So just make sure that whatever you define up here should match this down here. Okay? And then you should be able to run it. And then if you go to localhost 3000, you'll see it prints this JSON message. Oh, sorry that was such a hassle, everyone. All right, so is everyone good? Let me check on one stuff, because I know that was a bit of a mess.
Rows is fine, doesn't matter what you call it, so now go to the bottom. And change this to routes, they just have to be the same text. Sorry about that, my mistake. There you go, save and run. Okay, scroll up, that's okay, this stuff always happens. Scroll up here. Which errors are giving us? Oh, this is weird. Okay, so go back to your routes index and scroll down. This should not be something. I'll try it again. Cool, give it a try. How about you? Okay. JSON parse, expect to fail to find token. Okay, here we go. Nope. So this is in package.json. So go to your package.json, scroll up, uncomment this. Sorry, I was changing a whole bunch of stuff. There you go. And save. And then don't forget to save here too. Export default. Export singular. There you go. Save. Now try it again. We'll probably run into issues, but that's okay. The errors will help us figure it out. Oh, or you got it right. Nice. All right, try it in your browser.
I need to be better with my timing on this stuff now. All right, so does everyone see a message like this? Great. Good job, guys. Now, as just kind of an experiment, what you can do now. Now notice if I do a different path, if I do like / whatever. It's going to give me an error, a 404 not found. Right, because we've only defined that one path. So last quick little thing, just to demonstrate, is if we go back, and if we go to our project, let's go back to our routes. This is the last thing I'm going to demonstrate, and then we're going to call it a day. Because we're 30 minutes over, and sorry. If you copy this router.route here. Okay, and just paste it below. Okay, I just copied and pasted it. You can change the path here, right? I just want to demonstrate changing the path. So we do something like /hello, and we save. All right. If we kill this, so Control-C, it's going to ask us, we say Y for yes, and then we run it again. Is everyone good here? Now, if we do /hello, we'll get the same message, right? Because we defined another route with the hello path. Okay, good? All right. Now, if we had another function somewhere, we could actually change the handler to be that function instead. And so in this way, you can have different routes executing different functions, and you can have an API server. Sound good? Cool. All right, so where did my mouse go? Okay, there we go. To review, where the hell are my notes? Those are not my notes. Those are my notes. So to review, today we covered setting up a NodeJS project. We covered asynchronous programming. We covered some of the common built-in modules in NodeJS. We covered installing our own custom module and working with promises. We did testing, and we built an HTTP server running on Koa with our own custom route and our own custom controller. So good job, guys. So later, if you want to expand on this, you can add more routes, you can add more controllers, and in this way you can make your server however you want to make it. You can do anything. I am going to, oh crap. Hopefully I was loud enough that the mic picked it up. I am going to post this video online. I am going to cut out some of the downtime during it, like the break time and when I was messing with the errors and stuff. And I will take this, I will add comments to it, and I'll add some more stuff to it that you guys can play with. And I'll post it online. If you guys are not on our Discord channel, I recommend you join. If you're not sure how to find it, you can just go to codeseoul.github.io. Josie is so awesome. Okay. And here you can find a link to, where's my mouse? Our Discord server. Okay? So if you go ahead and click this, it'll bring you to our Discord server. In this case, I already have Discord installed, so it's going to pull up Discord. Oh, I didn't know that, actually. And you can chat with us here. So there you go. If you have questions or anything like that, you can always ask here. I'm going to post the video and my notes and the code on both Discord and on the Meetup page. Sound good? Yeah. And on the Facebook page, because I think we posted there too. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I apologize for being so late.
Question, when do you think this lecture will be available on?
Probably before Tuesday morning.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have it up before Tuesday morning. Yep. Cool, well thank you everyone. And if you are hungry and want to grab food, and you want to keep hanging out, we're going to grab food. So if you want to do that, let's do it. If not, hope you had a good time.
Thank you so much for your time.